Nandana Raja Jana Ranjana Nandana Raja Jana Ranjana Jamana Thira Vanachari Jamana Thira Vanachari Jamana Thira Vanachari Jamana Thira Vanachari Madhava Hare Krishna. I guess this is Good Morning Krishna House. So, we're reading now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you're on the invocation.
The Om Namo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Just a quick grammar note for those of you who love grammar, that Bhagavate, the words Bhagavate and Vasudevaya are both in Sanskrit, the dative form. Sanskrit's an inflected language, which means that the prepositional senses like to, unto, with, for, by, and from, and so on are expressed by inflections, endings at the end of the words. So because Bhagavat is a masculine noun ending in a consonant, it takes the letter E, Bhagavate, which means unto Bhagavan. Whereas because Vasudeva ends in a vowel, short A, Vasudeva, therefore it takes the form Vasudevaya. And so it's Om Namo obeisances to the Lord Vasudeva. So that's no extra charge for you for the grammatical information. So
in the reading from God Dances, page 183. We start with Krishna returns.
At 183.
183. The gopis, having filled their ears with songs of touching themes, burst into tears, for Krishna still was nowhere to be seen. O king, their sobs for Krishna, loud and long, reflected pain, and eagerness to see him they no longer could contain. And then Lord Krishna, smiling with a lotus blossom face, returned to them his yellow robes and garlands still in place. So pleased were they to see him once again that moonlit night, they doubted Cupid, god of love, himself could bear the sight. At once the gopis all stood up, their eyes all blooming wide. It seemed they had regained their life air after having died. One girl put Krishna's arm upon her shoulder. Leaning near, another placed her hands around the hand she so revered. A slender gopi joined her palms in reverential mood around discarded betel nuts that Krishna had just chewed. Another gopi, burning with the flames of passion's heat, positioned her excited breasts on Krishna's lotus feet. Beside herself with loving anger, one girl bit her lip and glared at Krishna crossly, as if striking with a whip. Another stared insatiably at Krishna's lovely face, as mystics meditate on Krishna's feet with endless taste. One gopi looked at Krishna, took him in and shut her eyes, then held him tight inside her heart, her dreams now realized. While standing there in ecstasy, the hair rose on her skin, and she became a yogi fixed on Krishna deep within. Each gopi felt so pleased with Krishna in her special way. The pain he caused by leaving them appeared to go away. They acted like those common souls whose miseries abate as soon as an enlightened person enters through their gate. Encircled by the gopis, Krishna's luster shone so bright, he seemed to be the super soul appearing in the night. They walked together on the shore, delighting in the breeze, made sweet with jasmine fragrances that brought in bustling bees. As autumn moonlight quelled the dark, the Yamuna with hands of softly rippling river waves made cushions from the sand. The gopis placed upon those cushions kumkum-covered shawls to seat their dearest Krishna, scripture's goal and friend to all. The Lord who sits in every heart sat too amongst those goals and gleamed with an attractiveness esteemed throughout the worlds. The gopis rubbed his hands and feet, yet miffed with what occurred, they mixed their playful smiles and looks with these uncertain words. Some people only love when they are loved by someone else, while others freely give their love and ask none for themselves. Still others don't love anyone, regardless of their mood. Dear Krishna, please explain to us these different attitudes. By making past the evening's incidents, why did their lover disappear, inflicting so much pain? Lord Krishna understood their minds and smiled as he explained. Those friends who show affection but are self-absorbed at heart are not friends in the truest sense. They simply play a part. In mutual self-interest, they would never show their love unless there was some profit they could take advantage of. O slender-waisted gopis, others love without concern for what they have to gain from love or get back in return. Such people may be currents, friends, or saints, but you can tell that they're truly friendly and wish everybody well. Still others don't or can't give back the love that they receive. They don't love friends or family, what to speak of enemies. Such people might be self-contained in spirit or in wealth, ungrateful or just hateful toward those better than themselves. Sometimes I do hold back my love for people who love me, for that allows their love to build still more intensively. Like rich men who have lost their wealth can think of nothing else, my devotees' unanswered love refines their higher self. Your love for me makes you detached from mere morality, the Vedic rules, your schedules, and even family. I left to make your love for me increase. Don't be upset. Did you believe that I could leave without extreme regret? A lifetime of the gods would pass before I could express how deeply I appreciate the love that you possess. Since you have forsaken all for me, what gift can I give you? Your glorious devotion in itself will have to do.
The dance begins. The gopis heard these charming words and, casting off distress, enjoyed themselves by touching Krishna's ample arms and chest. Those jewels among women, linking arms in great delight, began to dance with Krishna in Vrindavan's moonlit night. As they began the Rasa dance, each gopis quickly found that she was all alone with Krishna, dancing round and round. On seeing Krishna multiply his arms around each neck, The gods and goddesses above flew closer to inspect. Amazed, the gods beat drums and threw down flowers in cascades. Gandharvas and their wives sang out Lord Krishna's endless praise. The chimes of bracelets, anklets, and the bells strung from their waists resounded as the gopis danced with Krishna face to face. Surrounded by the dancing gopis, Krishna seemed to be a sapphire set in most exquisite golden jewelry. And the gopis sang of Krishna as they curtsied, twirled, and swayed, their hands in graceful gestures and their smiling eyebrows raised. The gopis' twisting waists propelled their blouses left and right. Their earrings swung in rhythm, though their braids and belts held tight. When gentle perspiration broke and glistened on their brows, they shone like bolts of lightning set in bluish-blackish clouds. The gopis' throats turned crimson, as if tinged with passion's thirst. At Krishna's touch, their songs of pleasure filled the universe. One gopi sang in harmony, and Krishna joined the fun, and then she deftly changed the beat. The Lord called out, "Well done!" Her hair and bracelets hanging limp, her energy all gone. One gopi hung on Krishna's arm, which held a dance baton. Another gopi's shoulder served as Krishna's resting place. She thrilled to smell his lotus arm adorned with sandal paste. A gopi placed her earring-laden cheek next to the Lord's and took his beetle remnants from his hand as her reward. Another gopi, bracelets tinkling, stopped to take a rest and placed Lord Krishna's tender lotus hand upon her breast. Now everybody knows that Goddess Lakshmi, Queen of Wealth, insists that Krishna spend his time with no one but herself. To find that very Krishna's arms around their necks that night, the gopis felt quite fortunate and chanted in delight. The perspiration on their cheeks and flowers in their hair combined to make the gopis' faces sweet beyond compare. As they danced on, their tinkling bracelets raised a pleasing tune in harmony with singing bees beneath the lustrous moon. Caressing and embracing them and dancing all the while, Lord Krishna showed the gopis love with cordial, playful smiles. Since they are all his energies, as is the Queen of Wealth, he frolicked like a child with a reflection of himself. My dear King Vishnurat, at the touch of Nanda's son, the gopis, overwhelmed with joy, began to come undone. Their ornaments and garlands seemed to scatter everywhere, and all their lovely clothes grew as disheveled as their hair. The goddesses in heaven were aroused to watch this dance. The moon and his associates, the stars, fell in a trance. Each gopi had her Krishna to exclusively possess, and Krishna, who needs no one, loved each gopi nonetheless. When all the gopis tired, Krishna kindly wiped their brows. His soothing hand induced their smiles, their love still more aroused. These smiles enhanced their glowing cheeks, their earrings, and their hair. Again, inspired by Krishna's touch, their singing filled the air. Their hugs crushed Krishna's garland and left marks of kumkum red. Aware of their exhaustion and their feverish limbs and heads, Lord Krishna led the gopis to the Yamuna to swim, just like a lordly elephant brings wives to bathe with him. As elephants might trample fields and paddies carelessly, the gopis and the Lord ignored mundane morality. While playful gopis splashed Lord Krishna, laughing out of love, the gods thought him majestic and rained flowers from above. Refreshed, the Lord emerged into the floral-scented breeze, surrounded by an entourage of lovely girls and bees. He strolled among the forest groves along the riverside as if a drunken elephant carousing with his wives. Despite the host of gorgeous gopis at his beck and call, the self-contained Lord Krishna had no lust for them at all. He went on with his pastimes through that perfect moonlit night, itself an inspiration of which every poet writes. Astonished by these topics, Vishnurata quickly asked, Lord Krishna, God himself, had just descended for the task of setting Vedic principles to govern human lives. How could he break a moral law by touching others' wives? Lord Krishna, the self-satisfied, the Yadu family's jewel, proclaims, protects, and follows every single Vedic rule. It seems he acted shamefully. Since you are so devout, please tell us what he had in mind and satisfy our doubt. Transgressions of the Vedic rules that tarnish you or me do not taint Krishna or the gods with immorality. The actions of such deities are free of any fault, as fire cleanly burns dry wood and makes no smoke at all. Such great souls come for us to see, but not to imitate. Their actions far exceed what we can do or contemplate. Though Shiva drinks a sea of poison, we can't drink a sip. Can we then dare to mimic Krishna's pure relationships? We need not try to imitate what great devotees do. We simply need to follow them and hear their words of truth. How could Lord Krishna's actions bring a consequence to him when those who simply follow Krishna cleanse their hearts of sin? The devotees of Krishna, so agreeable and pure, are wise and potent yogis with no karma to endure. So how could Krishna, God himself, who comes at his sweet will, be less than his devotees or be somehow unfulfilled? What fault is there for Krishna, who resides in every heart, to take the gopis with him to the woods to be apart? Since Krishna has created us, the gopis and the rest, what sin occurs should he embrace a gopi to his chest? When Krishna comes before us in his true identity, his pastimes draw devotion from each person that he sees. Why, even all the gopis' husbands felt quite satisfied, for Krishna's Maya made them think their wives were at their sides. The dance went on 1,000 yugas till a hint of dawn at last led Krishna to advise the gopis to move on. The gopis, leaving Krishna to return to home and hearth, preserve those secret pastimes in their unpolluted hearts. Now, anyone who faithfully recites or hears these words of Krishna and the gopis and how everything occurred shall gain both love for Krishna and the wisdom of disgust with ordinary sex affairs that spoil the heart with lust.
That was really brilliant. Congratulate Canto Prabhu on this extraordinary book. Very good. It's a real achievement. So, now, hate to bring everybody down, but we're going to do some philosophy. So, well read. So, as you may know, as you probably noticed, this conception of religiosity, Krishna dancing with the gopis, is remarkably different from the normal concept of religion that we find elsewhere. And so I want to talk about that. How can we explain to people that the highest spirituality or the highest religion, Dharma, is a beautiful young boy dancing with girls in the forest at night, touching each other's bodies and so on? Because normally people think religion means not to do these things. So rather than just take it for granted, rather than just assume that, of course, people will not think that this is religious, what Krishna's doing to gopis, I'd like to take a step back and ask the question, why do people think that way? Here we are on this planet, and why should people think that God wouldn't do that? Of course, the first obvious point would be that because when we do things like that, we are not in spiritual consciousness. In fact, lust, sex desire, is perhaps the primary deviation from pure consciousness. Because if we take pure consciousness here in an ethical sense to mean freedom from selfishness and a desire to serve or help or love others, then since lust is the most intense material desire, it would seem to be the exact opposite of spiritual consciousness. Of course, we can keep going a step back and not take anything for granted, and we can ask, why is it that lust is considered mundane? Why should people think that way? Why should religions around the world think that in order to promote religious consciousness, that they should somehow restrict people's sexual activity? Why is adultery considered so bad? Why is, let's say, sex between an adult and child considered so abominable? So ultimately, what is at the root of all these prohibitions or all these negative conceptions of human sexuality? And I think unless we get to the bottom of that, we can't really understand why that. The first obvious point, actually it's not the first, I made about 7 first points here, but one very important point is that we are not our bodies. We are actually spiritual beings. And Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, and I've said this many times before, why there's really no serious logical possibility that we are our bodies. The bodies are always changing, and we remain the same persons, even though we change our minds or have different attitudes or whatever. It's still us. That's why we say, I was a child, I was a teenager, I was this, I was that. God, in the 50s, they had a movie, I was a teenage werewolf, but anyway, that's just, they had movies like that back then. Kind of shows what adults thought of teenagers back then. So anyway, so we know that we are not the body, because we are the same person throughout the many different changes of the body. And so therefore, why did we get the body in the first place? Why are we in the material world? This is called in philosophy teleology, from the Greek word telos, which means a purpose or goal. So teleology in this context means the idea that there are objective purposes in life, not subjective purposes. For example, you can decide, today I want to go to the library. So you create a purpose for yourself, and you can say, well, now I don't want to go to the library. So we're not talking about subjective purposes, which you can assign to yourself or then cancel, but we're talking about purposes which are objective, they're beyond us. And so whether or not we recognize that purpose, it's still the purpose of our life. So there is an objective purpose to life, which is to be happy, truly happy. And happiness cannot be separated from knowledge, because the notion that you can just sort of be in a stupid drug state, which is happiness, that's an idea. That's an idea which was explored in a famous novel in the 20th century called Brave New World, in which people take soma, interestingly, which is the intoxication from the Vedic sacrifices. People take soma and they go into this stupid but pleasant stupor. And so also called the SPS syndrome, stupid but pleasant stupor. Anyway, I just made that up. That's not really a common term. So real happiness is not just to be stupidly oblivious to everything and to have some kind of pleasurable sensation in your body or mind. That's not, we don't consider that real happiness, because it's a state of stupidity, which can be drug induced. In fact, unfortunately, a lot of people do induce it that way. Rather, real happiness, profound, meaningful happiness, is in a sense inseparable from higher awareness. It's just like, for example, let's say someone is happy to see a very beautiful scene in nature, which may require you to leave the state of Florida. But anyway, sorry, California snob. So, okay, but let's say you see a very beautiful scene in nature, a beautiful lake or a forest or flowers or a meadow or something like that. Then, and you recognize that this is sublime beauty, that this gets into the whole philosophy of art. You know, why it gets into the philosophical question of truth and beauty. Is the truth, the ultimate truth, beautiful, or is the ultimate truth hideous and dark, like some of the crazy existentialist philosophers thought in the 20th century? Or is, when you finally discover the truth, is it liberating? You know the truth, and it shall set you free. It's the truth which is truly beautiful, that which is, well, is that which is beautiful true? If you, let's say, wake up one morning, you're in a really good mood and you're at peace with everyone, and so you see the world as a beautiful place. Is that true, or are you deluded? So this issue of truth and beauty, since we don't have too much time, we understand that yes, the ultimate truth is beautiful. In fact, the ultimate truth is infinitely beautiful. And therefore, there's something about beauty itself, and this is the value of art. It's also why much of modern art is just begging to be thrown into a dumpster and lit on fire. And that is because when we produce beauty, whether it's architecturally or artistically, or whether however we produce beauty, it's somehow bringing people closer to the truth. And so therefore, the purpose of life, the purpose of especially human life, is to revive our awareness of ultimate truth, ultimate beauty, which become ultimate happiness. So getting back to the point of pleasure, it's not the pleasure of a drug-induced state in Brave New World, but real pleasure means when you see the truth and you become liberated and you understand the truth is infinitely beautiful. And so although we can talk categorically about knowledge and pleasure, but in a sense, it's a single experience with different facets. You can say that when you achieve real happiness, it's also because you've achieved real knowledge. But actually, there's a single, in a sense, unitary experience in which you see the truth, and the truth gives you unlimited joy. It's not a stupid drug-induced state. It's actually the pleasure that comes with the most sublime knowledge. And since that's who we really are, we really are pure souls who at every moment experience that highest pleasure and that highest knowledge. If it's someone wanting to give me a very large donation, you can answer that call. So, otherwise, shut your phone off. So, therefore, getting back to the point of sexuality, sex, to be attracted by sex pleasure, which is kind of the problem everyone is in within the universe, the attraction to sex pleasure means just being faked out. I remember when I was a kid, there was a famous announcer for I grew up in LA, for the LA Lakers, the basketball team. And when someone got really badly faked out, he would say, this Chick Hearn. Do you remember? No. Okay. You don't teach about 1960s basketball announcers? This was the Krishna house. Anyway, so in basketball, when someone got really badly faked out, he would say, faked him into the popcorn machine. Because at the side of the court, there'd be some guy going by selling popcorn. So in that sense, if we think that real happiness comes from sense gratification, we got faked into the popcorn machine. You know, the guy kind of lunges and then just ends up 3 rows up, you know, entangled with the popcorn machine. So there is that real purpose in life to be happy, to be wise, because that's the loving desire of Krishna, of God. Any sane mother or father wants their children to be happy and wise. Actually, nowadays they're not so big on the wise thing, but good parents, they want their children to be happy and wise. And in a sense, you can't really be happy if you're not wise. So therefore, people have noticed, at least thoughtful people have noticed, that when that physical sexual desire is the most intense form of illusion, because it's the state of consciousness in which one is dragged farthest away from one's real identity. So in that sense, let's say prohibitions like no illicit sex, it's not just like they say the definition of a priest. It's someone with a deep fear that someone, somewhere, may be having a good time. And so people have this idea that religion kind of is like the ultimate party pooper, or it just, you know, it spoils all the pleasures of life. It's a bunch of frustrated people that want everyone else to be frustrated. But actually, we don't engage in inappropriate bodily pleasure for the same reason that your parents told you not to, you know, take poison candy from strangers, or not to take candy from strangers. So, it's not just moral. You could say, like for example, is a prohibition against illicit sex, is it essentially a moral injunction? Is it essentially psychological? Is it ethical? Is it, or is it simply good advice? And of course, this gets into, because all these things, so it's not just, you know, that we have certain regular principles, or Krishna's romantic affairs are good, but the mundane affairs are bad. There are actually reasons behind this. This is philosophy. In 1972, when I took sannyas at the tender age of 23, I'm very proud of the fact that I took sannyas at least 6 years before my frontal cortex was fully formed. Of course, in those days, anyway, it was a very young movement back then. But I wrote Prabhupada a letter, and I told him that I was going to travel around and preach at all the universities in America. Well, not all of them, but which I did actually for 2 years. I traveled around and spoke at many, many universities. In fact, it was during that tour that I met a really nice bhakta in Portland, Oregon, who became initiated as Kalakanta, who wrote this book. Actually, I met him on that tour. So when I told Prabhupada I was going to go and lecture at universities, Prabhupada said to me, do not present Krishna consciousness as rules and regulations, but as the most sublime philosophy. So even this point about, let's say, a prohibition against illicit sex, probably the most, in terms of the public, probably the most attractive feature of the Hare Krishna movement. So even something like that is actually based on philosophy. It's not, in other words, the rule follows the philosophy. It's not that there's just some whimsical rule that we try to justify with philosophy. So what we're really teaching is the most sublime philosophy, and any philosophy of life will include practical actions. I remember when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, go Bruins. Actually, I don't seem to go that much, but in terms of sports. But anyway, so when I was at UCLA, I took a course and it was called Indic philosophy. It was on the philosophy, history of the philosophy of India. And I remember the professor was a really nice person. He was one of those old German Sanskritists who was a nice person, became a friend of mine, and Hartmut Scharfen. So he kind of complained at the beginning of the class that, well, we call this course Indic philosophy, but it's not really philosophy. And this was a common thing back then, that to make a distinction now with all the, you know, the new contemporary religion, which is diversity, in a sense, it's also favored the inclusion of Indian philosophy and general philosophy courses to some extent. But he was saying it's not really philosophy because it's aimed at liberation. If you look at all the different Indian philosophical systems, they aim at liberation, whereas in the Western tradition, they kind of proudly and frankly somewhat ignorantly say, well, you know, we do philosophy for its own sake, and they always give the example. And so this, hope you don't mind going over all these points. Is that supposed to tell me something? Oh, I thought it meant that someone's trying to steal my car or something. So anyway, so like when you take introduction to philosophy courses and they give you the history of philosophy, they always say, it's amazing how they all say the same thing, that philosophy began in Greece because the Greeks were interested in knowledge for its own sake. And they always give this example that for the Greeks, the ancient civilization for the Greeks was Egypt. And so in Egypt, every year, wow. Sorry. So that's how so this philosophy for its own sake, not just to measure land, to assign property rights in Egypt, but to actually have the sheer pleasure of knowledge. So they call this knowledge for its own sake. And because Indian philosophy tended to be knowledge for the sake of liberation, it doesn't really embody the spirit of philosophy. I remember one time when I was working on a philosophy project, trying to edit Prabhupada's book on philosophy, I was interviewing different philosophers and to participate in the project. So one time I went to see a nice young guy who at the time was chairman of the philosophy department at Princeton University. And so I was telling him about our project, and he kind of, he didn't want to be narrow-minded, but he just couldn't accept the fact that Indian philosophy was philosophy. And I remember he was kind of exasperated, and he said to me, but the very word philosophy is a Greek word. It's a Western word, like philosophy is a Western discipline. Of course, that would be totally politically incorrect right now, that view. But so therefore, even the very idea that we're speaking philosophy, and so how do we justify? Because if we can justify that philosophy really is meant for liberation and not merely for the sheer intellectual pleasure of it, then we can look philosophically at the principles we have. Why do we have 4 regular principles? Why do we do certain things? Why did Krishna do what he did? Why do we, and so on and so forth. And so ultimately, when Prabhupada came to the West, he wanted to create a movement which would educate the Western world. And so we're not going to culturally colonize the Western world and suddenly everyone's going to want to change their ethnicity. That's not going to happen. What can happen is we can actually educate the world. So first of all, philosophy for its own sake is foolish, because there is nothing for, what does it even mean? Philosophy is not a person, and you can't do philosophy for the sake of philosophy because philosophy is not a person. So the English must mean something else. It must mean you're doing philosophy just because you like to do philosophy. But in that case, you're doing philosophy for your own pleasure or your own intellectual satisfaction and not in a disinterested way. So why is it that simply pleasing yourself intellectually is somehow more noble than actually seeking your ultimate state of existence? It seems to me just the opposite. It seems to me that seeking liberation, for example, even philosophers, they would say, well, we're becoming free from ignorance. They have this, I don't know what you call it, like this compulsive fetish where they want to problematize everything. And so, so they believe that they are doing good in the world because they are freeing people from sloppy thinking and getting clarity on important points, and in their desperate bid for relevance, like medical ethics and helping people to think clearly. So, but that's not for its own sake. That's for the sake of trying to benefit society. And since there's a real problem in the world of academic philosophy, like because people don't major so much jobs, philosophy PhD, you sit around, I don't know, driving an Uber car until a philosophy professor dies or retires, and then you desperately submit an application for his position along with 5,000 other Uber driving philosophers. So I'm being a little harsh here, but you get the point. So I mean, just to give an example, one time I gave a lecture at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I arrived a little early at the room. So near the room I was going to speak in was the office of the philosophy department, and they'd posted on the bulletin board a transcript of a talk given by the chairman of the University of Colorado philosophy department. He gave this talk to the parents of the graduating philosophy majors. And basically his whole talk was a sincere attempt to convince them that their children had not completely wasted the parents' money by majoring in philosophy. and trying to convince the parents that no, your kids can actually get real jobs, even though they major in philosophy. And for example, an undergraduate philosophy major is really good to get into a law school or something. So what I'm saying is philosophy is trying to sell itself and has always kind of valued itself because of its contribution to society. But what greater contribution could there be than freeing people from death, which is liberation? So to make that distinction, which was not a very happy distinction, that, well, Indian philosophy simply tries to, seeks liberation, as if that's a lesser goal than just trying to promote clear thinking in the world or something. Or helping people get into law school so they can, cheat all kinds of, get all kinds of guilty people free and, put innocent people in jail, because the real ethic is win your case. So anyway, so try, philosophy. And also, if you take away the goal of liberation, how do you know you're speaking the truth? Because you can go on and on and on, blah, 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 with all this technical philosophy. And if no one's liberated at the end, how is it true? Of course, then they could say, well, you have to argue philosophically that there even is such a state as liberation. But we assume there is. In fact, we experience it in degrees even in this life, because, for example, being free from a bad habit, or even worse, being free from an addiction, or being free from some ignorance. Let's say someone used to be your friend, and then you thought they betrayed you, so you gave up the friendship, and later you found out it was a mistake. They didn't betray you, so you're free from that illusion, and you realize this person actually was a friend. So freedom from bad things is a good thing. Freedom from disease. Why did philosophers want to help with medical ethics? Because if medicine is done ethically, more people can be freed, hopefully, from pain and suffering and disease. So obviously there's massive hypocrisy involved, massive and blatant hypocrisy involved in rejecting Indian philosophy because it aims at liberation. And so if we tell people, for example, there's a regular principle, we're going to make your day right now and tell you about our 4 regular principles. The point is, what Prabhupada wrote to me is that these are not just rules. This is philosophy. The rule emanates from the philosophy. The philosophy dictates the rule. So, anyway, I can't go on forever because you can't afford it. So, and you can actually work these things out yourself, but we're supposed to be philosophers. We're supposed to enlighten the world, not just give them doctrine, not just tell them, what our beliefs are, but actually reasonably, logically, philosophically show people that Krishna consciousness is the highest state of consciousness and the best possible life. So the fact that Krishna dances with the gopis, and at the same time, we preach sexual chastity. This is not a contradiction. It gets into ontology. What is the nature of Krishna? What is the nature of the material body? What is the nature of a spiritual body? What are the consequences of Krishna's activities? What are the consequences of our lusty activities? And if morality aims at the greatest state of being, the greatest happiness for people, then obviously Krishna's activities bring people to the highest state of spiritual consciousness, whereas mundane promiscuity drags people down to the lowest state of ignorance. So anyway, you can probably connect a lot of these dots. But so I'll just end and open it up for questions and acclamations and things like that. But the point here is that it is our duty. It is our duty in Krishna consciousness to educate the world, to teach people. And so we have to understand Krishna consciousness in a reasonable, philosophical way as far as we're able to. And I mean, it's not that everyone has to do that. I mean, you can cut potatoes with love of Krishna and go back to Godhead. But ultimately, it's like a team, like an army is a team. Someone actually is cooking potatoes, and someone is on the front line fighting, and people are doing all different services. So the Krishna conscious army, to use these wonderful military metaphors, which will make us very popular out in the world. So we are a team, and of course we all have different tasks, but as a team, we should be presenting the greatest philosophy. We should be enlightening people, just as we are being enlightened in Krishna consciousness. So the world sees we're not just a sort of a pious ethnic group, but actually we are the real teachers of humanity. We can give people the best knowledge. And therefore and this book, which is really beautifully written, I'm really, it's very impressive that Kala Kantaprabhu was done such a, really, I think something of really historical importance, because interestingly, when you hear this in English, this presentation in English, you're actually going back in time, because back in the day, the Vedic culture, that's how people heard these things. It was recited. In fact, Vedic culture, as we know from the Shastras, was for thousands of years an oral culture. The Bhagavatam and the Mahabharata and so on actually don't mention writing. So it was a very brilliant oral culture. And when people heard, at least educated people, when they heard the Bhagavatam in Sanskrit, they heard it the way you're hearing this book. So this sort of metered, and to some extent the Bhagavatam's rhyming. I mean, it's not always rhyming as in English, but this metered verse, which is recited, really is going back to a very ancient tradition. It's kind of new. It's new for the Hare Krishna movement, or new for the world now, but it's actually going back to an ancient custom. And it's very easy to listen to. So, any questions on these points? Back there in the peanut gallery, yes.
I have a few questions. My first question is about like some conversations that I've had with people at like the UF like Philosophical Society. A lot of people have argued that ISKCON is a conservative and limiting philosophy, which is like exactly the opposite of what you were talking about, as it like liberates. So I was wondering if you could speak on that for a little bit.
Yeah, very good. First thing I would tell them is, please stop begging the question, because they're just crassly begging the question. To associate conservatism with limiting is obviously begging the question. By the way, actually, unfortunately, the original meaning has now been practically lost to us culturally. It now means this brings up the question. This begs, which it used to mean circular reason. But anyway, I tried to save it, the original meaning, but it's not possible. Cultural tide has taken it away. So that's circular reasoning for the following reason. To conserve means to preserve something. For example, let's say you live in a society where people obey the rules, like they stop at red lights, they go at green lights, they don't attack and rape each other in the street. And then you get a new movement in that society that wants to tear down those rules so they can just run amok and do whatever they want. So conservatism in that case would mean to preserve a state of law and order in which citizens can actually walk safely down the street. So to say that conserving or preserving certain norms is limiting us is just an irrational assumption. You have to prove that that which we are conserving was actually limiting meaningful human experience, limiting human happiness, limiting human knowledge. Now, if we are eternal souls, and if attachment to the body takes us away from truth, away from happiness, away from real freedom, then actually it's the conservatism which preserves freedom. Whereas if someone becomes, let's say, a drug addict, let's say someone says, well, I want to be free to take drugs. And then let's say that person becomes a drug addict. So by the expression of freedom, I can take heroin. In fact, they destroy their freedom. So certain free choices destroy the freedom that enabled the choice. So therefore, the real question, philosophical issue here is not just, because my experience is the left, and not that I'm, on the far right or anything, but whoever is in power tends to become stupid. Because whoever is in power, for example, when I was in Berkeley in the late 60s, and I was in the streets, like incredibly self-righteous idiot. Anyway, but when I was in the streets in Berkeley, because the university administration and the state government, which I was in Berkeley, the governor of California was Ronald Reagan. And the students used to meet in the Free Speech Plaza, and they used to just chant F Reagan, which was, anyway, not polite, but so because the university and because the state government were in power, in those days, I mean, the UC Berkeley administration back then, back at the time, it wasn't like far right or conservative, but by modern standards, it would be considered conservative. And so therefore, the students had all kinds of arguments. I remember there'd be all the political tables on the campus, SDS, students for a deranged society. But anyway, so, they had all kinds of arguments. They were quoting Karl Marx, and they were even sometimes quoting Hegel, the real sophisticated ones. And and all that. And meanwhile, on the right, they would just say, that's indecent. You can't do that. That's wrong. And so it was the revolutionaries that had to come up with the arguments, that had to show that the status quo is unacceptable. And the people in power could just say, you can't do that. That's wrong. So what's happened is that the left took over the universities, purged conservative thought by such techniques as selective, let's say, faculty hiring, so that if you're conservative, you basically can't get a job at most universities. And also discouraging, penalizing students who promote conservative thought in the classroom. And so therefore, because it's the conservatives who are now in, the left is now in power, they've become the stupid ones who just think that, well, no, we have power, this is our dogma, and, if you're conservative, that's limiting. So the equation conservative is limiting is completely circular reason. You have to prove that it is. You can't just declare that it is. And so, so my impression now is that the real intellectual ingenuity, the clever thinking, the clever arguments are now on the right. I don't mean, people like Ray, what's his name, the beast, Trump. Yeah, I'm not talking about the stupid right. I'm talking about conservative intellectuals who have degrees from the best universities and who actually study history and don't just call people names like fascist, sexist, racist, and so on. So that's my, as an observer of contemporary intellectual history, it seems to me that the real ingenuity, the real cleverness now is on the right, not on the left. The left just calls people names. So yes, so I know you're looking. So I would just take it back one step and say that's something you have to demonstrate. That conservatism intrinsically is limiting, because the goal is not to limit. The goal is to liberate. The goal of intelligent conservatism is to liberate us. So basically, they're arguing that if you just dive into the bodily concept of life, if you just inflame all of your material addictions and passions and attachments, that leads to a state of freedom. So that's the first one. Next question.
My second question was, I was talking with this atheistic philosophy major, and they were saying that, like, because I like made the argument that like we are not the body, because like our cells change and we're still an individual, and we go through different phases of life, and our body looks different, but we're still the same. And there's a point in time where when we leave our body, there's an indication that we've left, even though the material body is still in the physical world. And so this individual was arguing that consciousness is separate from the soul. And I didn't really know
Well, on
to
what,
say to
did
that.
the person just declare that to be true?
I think they were just like not wanting to accept that maybe the consciousness is the soul.
Well, I would say that, I mean, consciousness, you could say, is a property or quality or characteristic of the soul. So that you, the soul, are conscious. But you see, what I do, you know, give you a few tricks of the trade, is that when people say things like that, what I just zoom in on is, okay, what's your epistemology? Like what are you actually doing here? If you say that consciousness is separate from the soul, I would just say, well, how do you know?
Yeah, they were saying that, like, I don't know.
But I mean, the person, is it because if someone is simply giving their opinion on something, that is not the same as giving an argument. And so you could say to that person, you know, I'm actually devoting my life to a process of studying myself and studying consciousness. And therefore, the statements I'm making are based on self-evident experiences. In Aristotle, because you can always be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. And so you have to make a stand to say, well, this is self-evidently true to me. It's like the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. So how do you know? If you say everyone's equal, I mean, you say, well, how do you know? How do you know everyone's equal? How do you know everyone deserves to be treated equally under the law? Like, is that just your opinion, or you can't prove that empirically? And so anything metaphysical, whether it's equality, whether it's justice, whether it's the existence of a conscious soul, those are all metaphysical claims. And so therefore, I would say to him, okay, you and I are making different metaphysical claims. I'm dedicating my life to studying these things through meditation, through spiritual practice. And so tell me how you come up with your metaphysical claim. Is it just your opinion? Is it something that someone told you? Do you have direct experience that? Are you engaged in a meditation process which showed you that actually you, the soul, are not consciousness? And how can it show you that if the soul is not conscious, is the soul unconscious? To talk about an unconscious soul is meaningless. It's frivolous. And if we're talking about a conscious soul, then if the soul is conscious, we can quibble about, is consciousness a property of the soul, or is the soul consciousness, or whatever, but it's just kind of trivial, because the real fact is the soul is conscious, and the soul is always conscious. And when the soul is not conscious, it's because it's in some kind of deranged state, or just got put to sleep on a surgical table or something, or because the soul is sleeping without dreams or something. But the soul per se is always conscious. Even when you sleep and don't dream, or if you're put under, let's say, in a medical procedure, you bounce back, you're conscious. So we know the soul is conscious. Because by soul, I don't mean a little battery inside of me. People have this way of talking like, oh, okay, I have a soul. No, I don't have a soul. It's not a little spiritual battery keeps me ticking. I am the soul. I am the soul, and I am conscious. And so therefore, it's just trivial quibbling to talk about, is the soul, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I am the soul and I am conscious. So,
I have another question.
Sure.
I've also heard the argument that because the science of Vedic philosophy has been like pretty much unchanging, that it's not a real science, because real science is being constantly tweaked and improved upon.
oh my God, these people are just,
I know, I heard that, I was like, okay.
okay, first of all, if you have a material science, God, these people, I mean, are they really that stupid or are they just like pretending? Okay, here are the relevant logical points. Empirical science, by its own internal definition, by its own ground rules, is limited to studying things which in some way are inferior to the investigator. Because the heart of the empirical method is the controlled experiment. The controlled experiment or controlled observation. For example, let's say you're studying the moon, and most nights except the dark moon night, the moon rises in the sky and then you study it. So the point is you have controlled access. It's not that you've got to get a permit somewhere from the moon ambassadors, or you go to the moon embassy and get a permit to see the moon. So we have controlled access, controlled observation. We can perform, for example, we can bring back rocks from the moon and subject them to all kinds of different geological analysis. So you cannot do empirical science unless you can control something. And therefore, by definition, you can only study things that are less than you, which can be controlled by you. And what that means is, and then frankly, these clowns, they come back and tell us, well, there's nothing out there except stuff we can control. It's like, I always give this example. Let's say you say, well, a thermometer is a scientific instrument. Okay, so I went out to study the universe with a thermometer. And now I know there's nothing out there except temperatures. That's what I mean. Are they really just, I mean, these people are just, they're precious. So when you, in terms of the philosophy of, let's say, a methodology, when you choose a particular methodology to study something, it must, actually probably easier for you to move. When you select a methodology, do you want a thermometer? Do you want a Geiger counter? Do you want to use a chronometer? I mean, what are you going to use? It's always based on an assumption you have about the object you're going to study. You choose a research methodology, you choose an experiment methodology based on your assumptions of the characteristics, the nature of that which you're studying. So when you choose a methodology which requires you to control the object you're studying, it means you can only study things you can control. Now, if we're trying to find a soul, you can't control the soul, you can't control God. And so therefore a methodology which can only work when you control something, if you apply that methodology to something which a priori is beyond your control, whoever does that is just being stupid. And so when they come back and tell us there's nothing out there except things we can't control, it's unbelievable how foolish these people are. And so, I forget, so please repeat your question, the third.
I've like heard different definitions of like pseudoscience.
Oh, yes. So
Yeah.
therefore, to think that the laws governing empirical science must govern metaphysical science, how do you justify that? You can't empirically justify that. The reason that atheist academic philosophers rejected logical positivism a long time ago, many decades ago, which is the idea that you can only claim to know something if you can empirically prove it. The reason they rejected it is because it contradicts itself. The statement, we can only claim to know something if we empirically prove it. We cannot empirically prove that statement. Therefore, to use the snooty language of academic philosophy, it's self-referentially incoherent. In other words, it contradicts itself. So a statement which, if it's true, is not true, it's meaningless. It's terrible philosophy. So therefore, saying that because when you say a real science has to control things and empirically study them, that's not a scientific statement. That's a philosophical statement for which there's no evidence.
Yeah, and I just thought of another thing.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, we can talk after the class. Because I mean, I'm really happy that you're doing philosophy. We desperately need philosophers. In fact, I want to talk to you because we actually have a philosophy group, and you could work with us. Yeah. So once I think we're ending now. So yeah, make sure you talk to me for, okay?
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Hare Krishna.
Govinda, Rama Ramani